And we are live here reporting to you Grandmaster Illia Nyzhnyk with yet another lecture on supposedly how to prepare like a pro, but surprise, surprise, it's not going to be that. Today I'm actually going to be doing a little sneak peek into my legacy lecture series that's going to start next week. I thought it's going to be starting this week, so there's a little bit of a misunderstanding on my end here, but here we go. Chess legends of the past and their influence on middle games is the topic. And today I would like to present to you guys the examples from arguably one of the best American player of the past, Grandmaster Paul Morphy. I'm sure all the chess fans, both here and in the chat right now, are trembling with excitement as much as I am. But I want to actually kind of tone down on the examples and maybe
just for one moment.
Okay. Okay, we're good now. So the examples that I'm actually going to show you guys today don't necessarily have all that good stuff that people usually associate Morphy with, but it's more of a demonstration of how his understanding and his findings in the middle game shaped the aggressive play that we know and use today. So game number one, not going to be showing full games for the most part, just the positions where I believe Morphy has made very, very important practical choices. So in this game, for example, this position, by the way, came out of King's Gambit, my apologies, where white sacrificed a pawn. And as you can see, this structure is very, very typical to that of a King's Gambit position. White is down a pawn, but in return, white has a very, very strong center, getting ready to try and run black down. White is also ahead in development, although black is currently able to go ahead and castle, which would be the normal way to go. But this is what Morphy ends up doing here, and this is just the beginning of his superb positional play. So at this point of time, black has many choices. The most obvious decision here would be to just go ahead and try and develop the queen side pieces, right? Because no matter what, one of the most important things to remember is that everybody needs to jump in there, right? Oftentimes you can't really make do with just a few pieces playing. You need to make sure every piece at your disposal is participating somehow. And here is Morphy's unusual, for that time especially, unusual choice, where he ends up playing d5 and then he plays, wait, what a second. Is this really what happened? This is not what happened, isn't it? It's not. I knew it. I knew that that's precisely not what happened. But I'm being stupid, because here, what the line I just showed you would be the normal way to play, but that's not what Morphy did. Okay, there we go. Okay, as we've gotten that out of the way, I knew something was wrong. But yeah, there's no way. This looks too normal. Paul Morphy lecture, yes indeed. Hello, Devin, Mr. Nitzworth in the chat. My apologies. I was showing the obvious decision, which maybe many people of today would go for, so castle, try to develop, but this is not what Morphy did in this case. He went ahead and made this positional sacrifice with a move b5. One might say that, okay, what is this about, right? We are giving up our extra material, and for what purpose? Well, there is actually a very, very simple explanation. This is the kind of positional sacrifice that you make in order to significantly speed up your development phase, right? So after white takes on b5, by the way, actually ignoring the pawn would have been a practically better option, but post Morphy, luckily for him, ends up taking the pawn on b5, and now Paul Morphy gets a sudden boost of tempo moves, right? What are tempo moves? Tempo moves are the moves that allow us to accomplish multiple tasks with a single move, right? So in this case, the move c6 hits white's bishop and prepares the tempo development of the queen, right? So bishop goes back, Paul Morphy goes d5, another tempo move, opening up the position even more, right? So this is the time where Morphy's material advantage is completely gone, but what has happened in return is that position is so open now that playing for extra material is no longer the goal for Paul Morphy, right? He is going to unwrap a strong attack. And here is another unique situation here. In rare cases, we want to hide our king without castling. In this case, it is precisely what Paul Morphy could have done. Actually, the move king f8 is practically better than what he did. I just want to point out that king f8 saves us time. What do I mean by that? Well, because our bishop is going to be better utilized somewhere here. So let's say white goes bishop to b3. Now queen b6 check, developing the queen, checking. King h1, now bishop to a6 might have been played, targeting the pawn on d3. Our goal is to get our pieces out as quickly as possible while also simultaneously hitting white's pieces in the process, right? Hence the definition of the tempo moves. So I feel like this would have been a much more practically challenging way to play against white. And I feel like this is where Paul Morphy, well, once again, he had the right set of mind, but the execution was sometimes a little bit flawed. He goes ahead and plays bishop e6. I believe that this move not only wastes time, but also runs into some potential issues. After bishop b5 check, which is something white should have done immediately, this is also another example of a tempo move, right? White removes the bishop from the attack and also hits black back immediately. Right now, let's say knight bd7. White can try for knight d4, taking advantage of the pinned bishop. So this type of tempo play would have been preferred for white. Luckily for Morphy, his opponent was probably already very scared at this moment of time. So he starts playing way too defensively, and this allows Morphy to accomplish great things. So this is where he unravels the attack on the king side. He goes knight e4, and as you can see, very soon he is gonna completely run his opponent over with his king side pawn mass. His opponent immediately cracks under pressure, goes ahead and shoots himself in the foot by playing c4. This is just a very elementary blunder. The d4 is hanging, so actually taking with the bishop is even more effective, as knight takes d4 runs into knight takes d4 back. Black is having a phenomenal position. Knights are very strong. I'm usually a big proponent of the bishop pair. Here, on the other hand, there is nothing sadder than white looking at their bishops that are doing absolutely nothing. So the game, as far as I know, ended pretty quickly. Yeah, actually, this did happen in the game where I did end up taking on d4, and his opponent was nice enough to allow Morphy to do the smothered mate, right? Queen g1, knight f2, and this way the game was over. So I just want to for a second go back to the original position, and once again point out that this positional sacrifice might not have been needed for black to succeed. Black's position is good as is. Black is up a pawn. Black can complete development normally, right? But the whole concept of positional sacrifice was probably kind of introduced by Morphy. Like he is the kind of player who would go for these types of sacrifices all the time, and this is what makes him such a unique player, because the concept of his concept of material balance was tilted in a good way, right? He correctly recognized that material only means something for as long as you can use your pieces effectively, and in this case, his attempt to give up the pawn back, the extra pawn back, was a clear indication that he understood that he doesn't really need an extra pawn to win the game. What he needs is he needs to bring his pieces in as quickly as he can, right? And that's what makes this position sacrifice so interesting to see, as he was one of the first people who realized that this concept is actually very practical and very difficult to deal with, in real games. So that's game number 1. Hello, Extra Cheese Project. I love the name. Some of the more standard attacking examples from Paul Morphy. This position happened from the infamous Evans Gambit. Back in those days, people were playing Evans Gambit all the time. The whole point about Evans Gambit is white sacrifices a pawn, right? Sacrifices a pawn for piece activity. Evans Gambit is the best. I wouldn't call it the best opening ever in this day and age, because people have learned to deal with it, and everybody will take the pawn and never give it back these days. And you know, with proper defense, it's actually not a very good opening line, I want to say. But back in those days, you know, Morphy in his classic attacking style would go for Evans Gambit quite consistently and would have excellent results in it. So as a demonstration, one of the advantages of Evans Gambit is that your opponent's king remains in the center for way too long, right? The king is on e8. We have multiple ways to hit it. Sometimes it involves us hitting the f7 pawn. Sometimes we can pin the knight and make more threats. And sometimes we are even lucky enough to open up the center with e5. I should be making these arrows different color because people will quickly get confused. But position is very rich. The bad part about playing any kind of gambit is that we are under immense pressure. What do I mean by that? Well, if we lose time, right? If we are trying to attack and our attack for some reason fails, if we are being ineffective with our piece placements, if we do not identify and correctly attack certain targets, we are running a risk to simply lose games because we are down material. If our attack doesn't work out immediately, we are in trouble. Wasn't the case with Paul Morphy. So he goes ahead and plays bishop b5, pinning the knight. Now the threat is clear, right? We are trying to play d5 and win that knight. So his opponent responds. His opponent goes ahead and takes on f3, and now g takes f3. One might say that, oh well, why did Paul Morphy willingly expose his own king? Isn't it going to come back and bite him in the future? Well, it might be the case, once again, given our attack fails, but it's not going to fail because we are very, very good at attacking, remember? Parad, I have become a GM. When did I become a GM? In 2010. That's it's been, what, 16 years now? It's been a while. Okay, so d5 is the big threat. Actually, there's no way for black to counter this except for moving the king away from the pin. Hitting the bishop doesn't really do much, as we can just retreat and still threaten d5. So black goes ahead and retreats. Now we are getting somewhere. What happened? We have sacrificed the pawn for not necessarily an immediate payback, right? We are not getting back any of the material we've sacrificed. What we are looking at here is a long-term attacking prospect. What do I mean by that? Well, the king is on a fate. The king is never castling, meaning that it's stuck in the center / on the king side without getting proper support from black's pieces, right? So we are now entering step number 2. We have reached the position that has great potential for us. Now we need to make the best we can with what we've got. So Morphy develops the bishop, goes bishop e3, supporting his central d4 pawn. His opponent finally gets the knight out of the way, going knight c to e7, and king h1 comes through. As much as the g file is white's weakness, it is also Paul Morphy's strengths, right? Because the g file can easily be accessed by our rook, using it as nice little hitting force against the black's king in the future. So king h1, c6, bishop a4, d5. So can somebody tell me, why is Paul Morphy's opponent trying to create this chain? So the c6, d5 just came through, making black this nice little chain of pawns. There is a very good explanation for this play. Black is down in development, right? Black's pieces are underdeveloped. Black has a weirdly placed king on a fate, and besides the king, I'm not even sure if we can count the king as the developed piece right now. I don't you know, it's a badly placed piece, but it's not developed to a right square. Black's developed pieces are the knight on b6 and the bishop on b6 and the knight on e7. And as we can see, white has a lot of developed pieces. You know, both bishops, the knight, the king on h1 is pretty well placed. The rook on f1 is about to go to g1, so white has a big development advantage. And yet, black is not in a hurry to get the rest of their pieces out. Instead, black creates the pawn chain. Why is that? Extra cheese got it, exactly. So white currently has a bishop pair advantage. What does it mean for us to have a bishop pair advantage? Well, bishops are incredible attackers when the position is open. What does it mean when the position is open? Can somebody tell me? No pawns or pawn chains, right? If pawns are traded and the position is open, meaning that bishops can move around freely, bishop pair becomes monstrous. I had games in my own experience where I would give up like pieces, not just pawns, pieces, just to make my bishop pair work, and it would work. If you guys, I always like making this example because I've known for a pretty long time that the bishop pair can be very, very efficient and can win games, all by themselves. I have received my confirmation of this fact as I was watching AlphaZero versus Stockfish match. I'm not sure how many of you guys watched this match. AlphaZero is an AI, artificial intelligence, developed by Google. Their AI has managed to beat some of the best players and engines in most of the board games, chess included. The AlphaZero AI works in a way where it keeps learning to play board games by continuously playing millions and millions of games against itself. So it's a neural network that essentially teaches itself how to play. And with this strategy, the AI was able to beat Stockfish. The AI was able to beat some of the world's strongest Go players in the world. And during its match against Stockfish, AlphaZero had a couple of amazing cases where it would give away 2, 3, sometimes even 4 pawns just to get to a bishop pair in an open position, and it would win amazing games with it. So fighting against the bishop pair is of utmost importance here for black, even at the cost of development. Wasn't there a complaint that it was a network versus Stockfish on a laptop? No, I don't think so. From what I heard, Stockfish was also using like a big library. It wasn't just a very one-way match. Okay, so going back to the position here, Morphy can't really deal with this pawn chain as of right now. Taking on d5 is very detrimental to white's position overall, right? Because it separates the pawns. Now white has a whole bunch of extra pawn islands unnecessarily. Plus, it allows black to force a couple of trades, right? Black is ahead in material, so one of the things black will try and do is trade as many pieces as possible. So that's definitely not going to be in Paul Morphy's favor. So he goes ahead, plays rook b1, a simple yet effective developing move. Now, anytime the bishop wants to move away, it's going to have to think twice because there is a pawn behind it. I wouldn't be surprised to see rook g1 as one of the next moves. So Paul Morphy goes queen d3, actually just a simple development move, getting the queen out. And here is rook g1. Pin to win. I mean, it's not exactly a winning idea to have your rook on an open file, but it's definitely an effective thing to do. So there is nothing that white can do immediately to beat black here, right? Every single piece in white's position has been developed. What happens? This is actually a great example of a great demonstration of what happens when all of your pieces are exactly where they need to be. Some people, especially those who learn openings, right? People learn where the pieces go in a certain opening, but then as soon as the opening phase is over, what to do next, right? That's one of the challenges of chess. You can learn some well-known tropes, but then at some point you'll have to think for yourself, and understanding of why certain pieces go to certain squares is the type of knowledge that helps you win games, right? And this is the type of knowledge I would strongly suggest everybody focuses on, not just memorizing the opening lines themselves. So over here, what do you guys think? What is going to be White's plan to win this game? This is also quite unusual. The winning plan here is unusual from a logical perspective. This is not something that I would expect us to do unless we can just somehow justify it. What opening was this game? This was Evans' Gambit. Man was ahead of the dog. You have found the correct move. Anybody in the audience want to give it a shot? Long-term plans for White to win the game. How are we going to do it? Okay, Extra Cheese Project has a more broad answer, which I do appreciate. Yep. E5, bravo, right, E5, F4. But you see, what we are essentially doing by playing E5 is we are closing the position down. And our pawns are advancing, and our main play is going to be on a king side against Black's king. The reason why I said that this doesn't seem very logical at first is because we're closing the position even further, killing off our bishop's effectiveness. But that's okay, right? Because E5, first of all, yeah, our bishops are arguably better than this guy, right? Because by playing E5, we have completely locked down Black's dark squared bishop. Arguably, E5 is the kind of move we have to make anyway, because Black is slowly trying to.
One other thing, it looks like your light squared bishop is also currently kind of out of play, and this opens up the B1's H7 diagonal for the queen and bishop.
Right. So E5 also, yeah, good point.
It improves that piece.
Right. Great point. Exactly. So E5 has long-term advantages that are hard to overlook. So E5 comes through. Also, just to add another piece of information, E5 takes away some of Black's best developing squares, which are D6 and F6. Wouldn't be unusual for Black to end up with a queen on D6 and with a knight on F6, both of which are now gone. Opening, make your pieces good. Middle game, make your opponent's pieces bad. Pretty much, you know, it's a good overall conclusion. Extra Cheese Project, yeah. Okay, Queen H4. It's a Paul Morphy game other than the Opera game. Oh, all of these games that I have today as examples are likely nothing similar to the Opera game. They're normal-looking games, but I think we can learn a lot from them. So Queen H4 is Black's attempt to take control over White's kingside advance. Right now, the F4 square is unavailable. So Paul Morphy immediately forces the queen back. So he's kind of doing it a little bit slower. I would say that going rook g3 followed by f4 would be a more direct approach, but Paul Morphy is not in a hurry. Going knight e2. I want to kind of make a small emphasis on this knight e2 move, because it doesn't feel like the kind of move that helps us, right? But the reality of every attack is that you need to make sure that you are using as many pieces for your attack as possible. What is this knight doing right now? Staring at d5, staring at b5, both of which are unavailable, right? So let's try to reposition it. Hence knight e2. Yeah, Paul Morphy's opponent immediately just kind of loses his temper and goes for f6. This kind of exchange moves are never really going to be in Black's favor. Yeah?
Could you just play f4 so
Sorry, pardon me.
f4 after f6?
unfortunately we can't push the f pawn because it's pinned right now. We could have gone rook g3 and then we could have played f4, which would be a more straightforward direct approach. But there's an issue with that actually, because let's say the queen goes back. If you go f4, there's h6. Now suddenly our bishop is trapped. This might still work, you know. But you see, what we are doing right now is we are engaging in a highly unclear tactical route, right? We are not exactly sure that all these upcoming trades are going to be in our favor, and we are opening things up on the king side while not having enough pieces to support all these trades, right? Let's say if our rook was on f3, or if this rook was on f1, we could at least keep this going with f4 and whatnot, but our pieces are not exactly where they want to be, and this is why it's actually smarter to take it slow. So knight e2, f6, now there's knight f4, forcing the knight trade. May seem at first that, oh well, we just traded one of the pieces, you know, why do that? But the g6 knight was one of the most important defensive pieces in Black's formation. Right now, rook takes g7 is an actual threat. If you guys take a look, I can make a dummy move a6, and I'll show you the rook g7 is actually a real deal. Because something like this can happen. The king is super exposed. If this rook ever moves, we can go ahead and take on b7. This is very, very unpleasant for Black. So Black has to deal with it. So Murphy's opponent once again loses his temper, goes for g5, and the game ends with the next couple of moves. Yeah, so at this point, with Black having exposed or having attempted to expose their own king, you know, there is nothing they can do. Take a look. Everything just kind of falls like a house of cards. King e8, rook takes b7, briefly sacrificing the rook. But now if king d8, there's a forced checkmate in 1. Not even going to ask you guys. Right, queen f8 was a checkmate, so the king has to go to f7. Bishop takes d5. The king keeps running. The safer play is always just to win your material back and then play chess afterwards, right? White is already up material. They can just go ahead and take on b7, but not Murphy. Murphy says that, okay, you're not surviving this. I'm going to go queen f8. There's a very, very fun checkmating threat right now. I'm looking at this position. I'm seeing that there is this queen takes f6. Rook takes g5. I'm sure there's many, many ways to checkmate here, but I like just simple rook g4 check. King h5, bishop f7 was checkmate. Having checkmated, sacrificing the queen is cool to me. Material becomes irrelevant in face of a successful king attack, yeah? We don't really care about winning the rook back or whatnot. The Black king is not surviving this. Oh, as I've mentioned that Murphy went ahead and actually took it. I think he doesn't have to. He can keep at it. He can keep his attacking strategy, and he would probably have checkmated shortly after. But he did play it safe for a little bit. And doesn't this work? Oh, it doesn't. That's a shame. Okay, so he did have to make a couple of safer moves, but in the end of the day, oh, here comes the cool queen sacrifice with a checkmate at the end. Having checkmated the Black king on h5. This was more of a methodical attack than a crazy, you know, sacrifice half of your chess set kind of attack, yeah? There was a lot of thought behind Paul Murphy's approach, and this is kind of what makes him such a unique player, that he was the one who found, practiced, and eventually mastered the positional aspects of attacking play at that time, and this is something that we have since pivoted off of in our own chess. Once again, I want to take us back to the example of the match between AlphaZero and Stockfish. Serves as another demonstration that positional sacrifices are very, very powerful. And it is something that we shouldn't be shying away from. Material only matters if you can use it. So that was my example number 2. How am I doing time-wise? I think I'm doing fine, yeah? Let us take a look at one of Paul Morphy's what is this game? Yes, this is one of Paul Morphy's endgame understandings. This example demonstrates how versatile Paul Morphy was when there was a need to adjust to a certain play style. In this position, you can already, I can feel the Paul Morphy style influence. The way black has built their position is such that white can never relax, right? There's always something going on the king side. White can never relax, and yet this eventually gets into the endgame. So the move knight g3 it looks fine. From afar, it looks totally normal, right? Hitting the f5, potentially allowing the king to run off. Speaking of the king running off, this is something that kind of shows you how comfortable or uncomfortable your opponent is with their position. Who is his opponent? His opponent is Daniel Harrwitz. So over here, g6, right? No need to overcomplicate things. We're just going to defend the pawn on f5. Can somebody tell me what is black's short-term plan going to look like? Black has a very strong maneuver to support their kingside attack. So let's say if white makes a dummy move, something that does not influence the action. Yeah, chess flopper, great. Knight f6 to g4. Black wants to loot material to king f2 and rook h1. No, we're not going to do that. Yes, knight f6. Our knight is coming to g4. As soon as it hits g4, white is in trouble. White is a toast. King f2 is the only way to run off, but I'm afraid it's not going to save white for too long. The king ends up on e2. We're going to have some more hits. And there's also knight h2, by the way. If Ilya was seeing simple tactics, he would have been a much stronger player now. But we know that that's not him. Yeah, knight f6. This maneuver is a great demonstration for why we require every single piece possible in our attack, right? So white wasn't waiting for that. No. King f2 happened immediately. Knight f6 still comes through. Rook h1. Ilya is not him. Yeah, I'm not him. These days, I'm definitely not him. Maybe one day. Well, at this point, black has no choice. Black has to play knight g4 check. Otherwise, the queen is completely trapped. So knight g4 check. King g1. I get it. The king does not necessarily want to be in the center, mostly because of how simple it is for black to get to it. So simple queen f6 followed by queen b2 actually guarantees that black wins material. There's no defense against queen b2. The queen is going to get in there and is going to start doing the Pac-Man things to white's queenside pawns. So this is why the king has to be back to g1 and white has to go for this trade. So I call this process the de-escalation technique, right? What white has done is white has de-escalated black's kingside attack, seemingly to perfection, right? There's nothing else going on the king's side. Well, this is where the game enters more of a positional territory. Yeah, and if white tries e4, if white tries something active, because of black's piece formation, there's going to be just takes on the f takes e4, and the f4 pawn is struggling. If rook takes e4, we might have some tricks with queen a1. I would seriously consider this maneuver. Once again, making sure all of my pieces are at their best possible shape. The bishop on b7 is not such a piece. We need to make sure it's doing something active, so to f5 or to g4 it goes. So Morphy's opponent goes ahead and plays it slow, goes queen d1, potentially eyeballing this queen d4 idea, maybe trying to trade queens, making sure the white's position is safe. Well, now knight g4 comes back in, and queen h4 becomes a real deal. Queen d2, queen h4, and knight f1. Again, seemingly white has defended, but you know what I think. Any time that you're playing with white pieces and you find yourself in this type of scenario, the case where you have to be defending against your opponent's fearless attack, it's not pretty. Yeah, something has gone wrong, and it inflicts, I want to say emotional damage, but I should have done it with the Anthony Hayes accent. But we're trying to be serious here, so I won't. Anyway, practically, whenever you're playing white, you don't want to be defending. Yeah, you're in position of control. You have a first move advantage. You don't want to be in mercy of your opponent's resources. So rook e8, right? Black does not really have any immediate way to support their attack, right? Black's pieces on the king side are as good as they can get. So it's time for black to, make the remaining two pieces great again. So rook e8, I would be looking at possibilities such as b5. By the way, the b5 is one such positional sacrifice that has become increasingly more and more common, because what this does, let's just make a dummy move again, right? Let's see here what this sacrifice does. I'm not saying this would work immediately, but what this does is at a small price of a single pawn, we are creating a long-term target for our bishop. So from a bad piece that was there passively defending, now our bishop is an attacking piece all of a sudden. I wouldn't be surprised to see Paul Morphy having tried this maneuver in his future games. Not in this one, however. It didn't come to that. He didn't have to try b5. So his opponent goes g3, queen to h3, and then this is why b5 never happened, because white said, no thanks, I'm just going to go ahead and play b5 and keep things as closed as possible. We have to be objective. During chess games, being objective is arguably one of the more important mindsets. What do I mean by that? Well, by continuously creating annoyances for our opponent, we are forcing certain level of mistakes, right? So if you take a look at the position just from afar, you will see that white has a bunch of weaknesses. White has a weak pawn on e3. White has a weak king side, right? We have a phenomenal outpost for our knight on c5, right? So these kind of things. Once we are done with a certain play, so in this case, white has made all these positional sacrifices just to ensure their king side safety, right? So we are basically done with the king side. We are now trying to reap the rewards of our practical play. We are going back. Knight f6, queen g2, and here comes the excellent positional understanding. It is okay to trade pieces when the resulting endgame is going to be heavily in your favor. So this is exactly what Paul Morphy does here. He trades queens, and now a very, very important resource, a6. Why is this so important? Well, okay. Rhetorical question. I have two arrows showing why. It is what it is. I shouldn't. I'm not sure why I have so many arrows here. What's up with that? It takes away all of the potential questions I can ask. But the A6 is the type of resource that is very, very difficult for white to deal with. If white takes on A6, now suddenly white has a ruined pawn structure with C4 becoming the main target for our bishop. And if white does what happened in the game, which is trying to, trying to keep the pawns the way they are, suddenly we have, a trajectory for our near future. Well, white kind of has no choice and has to live with it, however bad it might be. So here it comes. Paul Morphy infiltrates with rook A3, and now E4 goes through. Ignoring the E4 is impossible. We're gonna regret ignoring this move. If we don't take on E4, white's probably gonna end up playing E5, and then E6. That's just way too much for us to deal with. So trade is imminent. We're gonna trade, and we're gonna trade again. And here comes the beauty. Nobody is up anything, nobody is down anything. It seems like this kind of endgame would be survivable for white, but practically it is not survivable for white. Because what ends up happening is the huge difference between the bishops is going to play a big role in black's ability to win this game. The bishop on b7 is about to become good. Few more steps, and it's going to happen. Paul Rubinstein, yeah. Well, just like every strong grandmaster, people back in those days were also pretty versatile. Who could have thought? Yeah, the grandmasters had their own style, but could also perform in other styles. Maybe not on the same level, but pretty good. So rook c3, bishop f3. Gives white some hope, right? Because now if we take on c4, suddenly we are the ones losing. Why? Yes?
In the previous position, one move though, what about bishop takes g6?
Bishop takes g6. Oh, okay. So you're catching me off guard here. I see what you're trying to do. So you're trying to go all the way here, and you're trying to play the end game, which is, this rook endgame might actually be drawn. I'm going to be up a pawn, right? Because you can go here. It's going to be something like this, right? Something along these lines. This rook endgame might be a draw because it's a rook endgame. White has a lot of targets. White has a possibility of making their own pass pawn, so this might actually be drawn. I was wondering if over here I can begin with rook takes c4. And keep it a rook and bishop endgame as opposed to just a rook endgame, yeah? So now this maneuver doesn't do anything because I can always take here. And if you, let's say, move back to e4, which is probably the best. I'm not sure if this is winning for me or not. Actually, I'm suspecting that this might actually not be winning for black. Why am I saying that? Black is up a pawn. We are about to transpose into a pawn endgame. Why am I being skeptical for black here? Can somebody tell me? Yep.
Because
White's king is very, very close to the center, and also, even more importantly so, the pawn on b5 kills off two of the black's pawns. Yeah, the king actually has a very, very straightforward way of reaching c6. We might be cooked. We might be in trouble here. So bishop g6, I want to cheat a little bit. I want to check bishop to g6 with an engine. Arguably, this is the time. This is the perfect time for white to look for opportunities like these because the Paul Morphy's opponent's approach was passive defense, which ended with a loss, right? And bishop takes g6 is good. It is just good enough to make a draw here for white because we want to stay active, right? So good catch. Looks like this engine believes that black's best shot is to just play these kinds of endgames, I guess, with an extra pawn or such, but it's not good enough to win. So good. Speaking of passive defense, I've seen plenty of people falling victim to this mindset. People think that, oh well, if I'm playing the endgame and I can defend everything, you know, I'm good. That's what many people believe. You know, they are trying to make a draw and they're going to this endgame where they have some weaknesses, but it looks like everything can be defended. There's so many things people forget in those cases. You know, there can be zugzwangs where, you know, you have no good moves anymore. There can be additional problems where your opponent can create an extra weakness and your piece's defenses will be stretched thin. There's just so many things that can go wrong, and passive defense has a propensity of not working more often than it does. Okay, so whenever you have an option of making your pieces active, even if it comes with a price of a pawn, sometimes two, I would advise strongly considering that option. So not the case for Paul Morphy's opponent here. He goes for passive defense, defends the c4, and here comes the finisher. Black's wide-squared bishop jumps in. Black goes h5, and seemingly like, oh, well, white has defended everything, so what can possibly go wrong? It doesn't seem like anything can go wrong, but wait. We are about to witness a very simple yet such an effective maneuver. The king comes to f5. There's nothing white can do to stop this, right? The king comes to f5, and we may think that, oh, well, what's next? h4. Breaking through white's defenses. White is finally getting the rook active on a7, but is it not too late? It is too late. Black no longer cares about material. Black's pieces, just 3 pieces. Look, rook, king, and the bishop. Who would have thought that just having 3 pieces attacking is good enough to win? Well, here it is. There is no defense. Bishop to f1. The rook is going to go from the other side and checkmate the white king easily. Great demonstration of Paul Morphy's superb endgame understanding, even though, as we could see, if white played this more practically, right, not trying to hold onto material, survival was still possible. But if you're scared, right, if all you can think of is how to survive, how to defend your position, how to defend your weaknesses, oftentimes you end up losing anyway. So I urge you guys to look for more active ways of playing any position, no matter what, no matter how hopeless it can seem. Chances are there's always something you can do. Okay. I have a little bit more time, and I'm going to show you guys one more example of how good Paul Morphy's attacking skills were. Not focusing too much on the opening phase here, some Italian defense, yeah? So weirdly, knight ends up on a4, not sure how, not sure why, but it should be a hint, right? If your opponent's pieces are misplaced, it should be a hint that, oh, well, there's something I might be able to do about this, right? So not an exception here. I was checking this position with an engine a little bit, and the engine was showing that, oh, well, maybe black should just play a move like queen d6. You know, let's just play normally, get our queen out, get the rest of the pieces out. White will inevitably have to spend a tempo bringing the knight back, so we're going to be up some tempi. But why? Let's just go ahead and destroy white when we have a chance. So Paul Morphy goes bishop g4. What's the threat here? Simple. Yep. You have an answer? No? Yeah. No, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Knight d4, yeah, simple, right? Very, very simple. We pin the knight, we're going knight d4. if we end up playing knight d4 successfully, the game ends. I'm not sure how many of you guys in the chat know about this, but there's a lot of tricks involving this this knight pin, where if you end up playing knight d4 while the knight is pinned, you're essentially just completely destroying your opponent's kingside pawn structure, and that it makes winning very easy. So bishop g4, bishop e3, defending the d4, right, makes sense. And Paul Morphy goes king h8. By the way, speaking of this idea, king h8, it is something that a lot of people began using to spice things up in relatively safe-looking openings such as Ray Lopez or Italian defense. It works a little bit differently than here, but the idea is that we're just gonna try to run our opponent down with f5, f4, or f5, e4, right? That's simple. The reason why we want to play king h8 is so that we don't have to worry about our king being in an unsafe pin. So this is where Paul Morphy's opponent, catches up to things, goes knight c3, the trade goes through, and f5 comes in. Simple threat, e4. We're just trying to win a knight. So bishop c1. See what happened a move earlier. White had a problem. They had to defend against knight d4, so they played bishop e3. Now they still have this problem, right? The knight is badly placed on a4, so had to go back. After f5, black hasn't made a single unusual move, right? For the past 5 moves or so, black has made normal-looking, attacking, developing, logical moves, right? And white is experiencing all these problems out of nowhere, right? This is what it means to have a singular bad piece, right? Knight on a4 is literally the reason why all these things are happening. So white had to waste more time and played bishop c1. Now this is where Morphy goes full kind of full Tau style, because in this position he goes ahead and plays e4. There was arguably a safer way to get it done, but e4 is very straightforward, very to the point. It's a positional sacrifice that allows him to get kingside pawn structure ruined, so knight e5 comes in. Once again, there are other ways to win this position, but this one also works. It's just, there are other ways. Actually, this is possibly one of the reasons why it may not be as good, because maybe Paul Morphy forgot about knight takes e5. It's a kind of sacrifice that gives white a little bit of hope, because they win a bunch of material back, but black is essentially still up a point of material, having a queen for rook, bishop, and a pawn, plus these pawns are doubled. Somewhere along the way, surprisingly, Paul Morphy manages to screw up. There was already a draw here somewhere. Yeah, as soon as the c7 pawn fell, never underestimate your opponent's counterplay. Now with the rook on c7, white gets new chances, right? White can bring in another rook to the 7th rank, and things can go wrong on very many levels. So it was a little bit iffy, but eventually Paul Morphy got it done. Yeah, just pushed the a pawn all the way down to the victory, and the game ended here. Some hiccups with the advantage conversion, but once again, simple, Get your pieces out. You have an idea, right? Let's go all the way back. You have decided that you are going to use the fact that your opponent's knight is misplaced and attempt to run your opponent down. Make simple, developing moves that bring your pieces closer to your goal's execution, right? So bishop g4, none of these moves were anything special, right? King h8, removing the king from the pin, getting ready to push the pawn. White has no choice but to bring the knight back. The knight can't actually go anywhere else. It has to go back. After the trade, f5 comes through. e4 is a critical threat. No way to deal with it other than go back. Bishop d6, bringing the bishop exactly where it needs to be as soon as the e4 sacrifice comes through. Right, so simple and yet so effective. Can I explain how would Morphy use the pin with knight d4? What if queen d1? Okay, so let's just imagine that white makes. Let's just imagine white makes a dummy move bishop d2. Knight d4 is very, very, very strong. Because if queen d1, essentially what happens is this, right? You're not winning anything immediately, but you will be applying a lot of pressure against white's king side in the long run. The king is too exposed, and there is nothing white can do to fix that. It's a long-term problem that handcuffs you and forces you into fully defensive mode, which oftentimes still fails because of how bad that pawn structure is. So that's a simple explanation. Oftentimes there's not going to be an immediate way to win, but as the game goes on, as black brings more and more pieces towards the king side, is going to happen. So I think that's my time, right? I think I did relatively okay time-wise. I'm being told that it's probably a good time to end. So I hope you guys enjoyed the lecture, and I'll do more of these starting from next week. Today was a little bit impromptu because it wasn't supposed to be. Today wasn't supposed to be the start of the series, but it was. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and I shall give the torch to yet another Grandmaster who is going to be annoying you for the next hour. So until next week, if you guys are happy to see me, I'll be streaming on St. Louis Chess Club's Twitch channel tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. So stop by, play me some games, and I hope you guys enjoy your evening. Take care. Peace. Okay. Whoa. Collapsed.
Hello everyone, I'm International Chess Grandmaster Yagiz, and I'm in the newly renovated St. Louis Chess Club here in St. Louis, Missouri, the chess capital of the United States. The Chess Club hosts premier events featuring the greatest chess players in the world. Some of the highlights from 2025 include Clutch Chess The Legends, the 2025 U.S. Chess Championships, and Clutch Chess Champions Showdown. But our true mission is to teach chess to students in the community and give children in the area the experience of competing in a real tournament setting. In 2025 alone, we served roughly 10,000 students throughout the St. Louis region, and we hosted a dozen scholastic tournaments, including the annual St. Louis Public Schools tournament that featured 200 students. Through our Scholastics Outreach Initiative, we brought the educational benefits of chess to more than 100,000 students, both in school and after school, with our own developed curriculum across the greater St. Louis area. Through robust after-school programs, tournaments, and educational outreach, we're not just teaching chess, we're fostering a love for learning, building confidence, and empowering the next generation of leaders, both on and off the board. Thanks to the generous support of the chess community, we are able to bring chess to thousands of students, building champions in the classroom and the community. But the St. Louis Chess Club is only half of the chess campus. Across the street at the World Chess Hall of Fame and galleries, visitors from around the globe can discover the cultural and artistic significance of chess. In 2025, we've hosted a number of exciting exhibits, including the animal-themed Paws and Pawns, Chess Variants Transforming Tradition, which teaches different ways to play the game. Charles Hauska, Master of Play, a career retrospective of a locally based artist. And Reading Between the Lines, Chess and Literature, an exploration of chess and its relation to the written word. The World Chess Hall of Fame is the only institution of its kind in the world, providing visitors with a unique opportunity to use chess as a platform for learning, exploring, and seeing their world in entirely new ways. In addition to our exhibitions, visitors can also enjoy curated tours, arts and crafts workshops, kids programming, and of course, the World Chess Hall of Fame music series, which has grown into one of our most popular events, hosting world-class contemporary and classical artists. 2025 was an exciting year of growth and outreach for both sides of the chess campus, and we look forward to serving the community in 2026.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Denes. Nice to meet you, and hope you're having a good day, because it's a good day. Because pandas are no longer endangered.
Wait, they are?
No, they're not. Yeah, this is the day when they're not endangered anymore. It's correct. And apart from that, we have more and more prodigies. Some of them are more accomplished than others. And in fact, I'm going to talk about one of the more accomplished ones. In fact, I even go as far as that he's not going to qualify for a prodigy for too long. When you become 2700, and he is nearing that, he actually won his recent game at Tata Steel. And I'm talking about Erdogmus. I don't know if you guys heard of the Turkish talent, Yagiz Erdogmus. I've been trying to teach some other grandmasters to remember his name properly. But hey, I'm going to keep trying and educating. I'm not claiming that I know the proper pronunciation. He is from Turkey. He's 14 years old and almost 2700, which is quite an accomplishment. The game I will start is this game between Erdogmus and MVL. And you might be wondering, well, when we're talking about promising players, when do they become legit? Which does sound weird, but I don't have any other ways to pinpoint it. Gukesh ceased to be a prodigy because he's a world champion. You're welcome. And it's sort of like that. They're all super accomplished. Once you get really accomplished, you're no longer a promise, you actually delivered. Same thing with Erigaisi. He hit 2800 at some moment, or at least really, really close. So he's no longer a promising player. He's more than that. So there are people who are trying to push Erdogmus aside, but facts are a fact. Being a top player or really being close to 2700 at age 14, that's delivering. Now, talking about delivering, Erdogmus is playing MVL in this game, and MVL is really somewhat of a test, really the test that you would want to see, because he's been top 10 for more than a decade. He's been a little bit out of it now, but he's been top 10 previously. So depending on how he's going to do, you can kind of tell that we're talking about the real deal. So let's take a look. Erdogmus goes e4, and e4, oftentimes you might be shocked to see that the first moves come as a surprise or somewhat shocking, because whenever people are facing MVL, you can immediately tell the openings he's going to play. You guys know what openings he plays? It's literally 2 openings that he does, and he does with black all the time. That goes for the chat as well. So one of them, of course, is the Grunfeld. It's obviously referring to this opening. And he does it all the time. So it's no surprise, and he actually been doing quite well, scoring well with this opening. So it is somewhat surprising that Erdogmus would go e4, because there is a 99.999% chance he's going to face the Grunfeld if he goes d4. So preparation wouldn't have been too difficult. Now, to put this whole thing into context, this has been like a mini match between Erdogmus and MVL, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And this time, though, MVL does not play the Najdorf, which is always an interesting thing. He goes e5. And why is that an interesting decision? Because he's sort of straying away from what he's been good at. Like, his biggest vice is that he has this incredible experience. In fact, it actually connects with the Bruce Lee idea. Some of them are more scared, like he is more scared of those who practice one kick 10,000 times than people who do different kicks, but, you know, all around and scattered. So he is not an expert of e4, e5, of course. Like any other super grandmaster, he played everything and anything, but he doesn't have that level. So knight f3, knight c6. Now, there is also a limited amount of options in e4, e5. d4 has been actually a go-to Garry Kasparov in his match against Karpov. But the big move is bishop c4 or bishop b5. In fact, he goes bishop b5, playing the Spanish. Now, MVL does not go full to Berlin, which is kind of the standard choice at the top level. He goes for pawn a6. And here, actually, Erdogmus makes a surprising decision. Surprising because you kind of don't expect for him to do this in this game. Can you guess what he does in this position? Open Rui? Well, it could be an open Rui, depending of the sequence of moves that will follow. Yeah, bishop a4 is the expected one, yes? Takes the knight. Same thing? Uh-huh. Yeah, and bishop takes c6 was played, and this is the Fischer way of playing. Now, bishop a4, of course, is the main line. But bishop takes c6, and that's kind of the funny part, because there's Chet actually been illuminating parts of the psychology that's happening. Of course, there was this back and forth, okay, you played e4, then he didn't go and play the Najdorf, but played e5. Now, bishop takes c6 is the way Fischer played, but the upside, and the funny part of it, is MVL played this opening with white himself. So he's in some sense playing against his own pet line, which shows confidence. It means that, okay, you know what you know, but I also know what I know, and I'm happy to challenge you there. D takes, this is more or less mandatory because you have to be able to go queen d4. Is it a bluff? I'd say that there is an increment of bluff, but not a lot of bluff involved. They might be bluffing slightly, but they already kind of know the play, even if they don't know it as well. Like, MVL, of course, knows this. But, yes, I'd say, as Chad points it out, it's a semi-bluff. So castles, now interestingly enough, White often thought of the idea of castling queenside, but it's not as big of a deal. For some reason, even if you castle queenside, it won't improve your position drastically. If it would be a much sharper position, it may matter, but here, not so much. MVL definitely is a strong player. As I said, he's been a top 10 player for a long while now. Castles, queen f6. There's zillions of moves here. Black can go bishop d6, bishop g4, all kinds of moves with the queen and the bishop. Queen f6 is something that, again, MVL actually played against Carlsen and won convincingly. So d4. E takes d4. Now the big question I'm going to ask y'all, how to follow up. Yes? e5. So you could go e5. However, even though this push feels nice, the issue is that this queen actually wants to move away from there. Yeah, like g6, among many others. It's not like e5 would be a mistake, but the queen actually only wants to be here temporarily. So d4, e takes. And there is also a bigger problem with e5. If you go e5, there's plenty of white squares you give up. And that's actually sort of the compensation Black has for this.
So by that same tack, bishop g5
Yeah.
doesn't really.
No, bishop g5 is actually very good. So, and that's actually what I mean by that. e5 is okay. The problem with e5 is that you are giving away a lot of squares that you covered.
So you achieve the same result there. But
Yeah, you achieve the same results. Also, you're developing a piece. So queen d6. Still have to decide how to capture. How many moves deep they know theory? It really depends on the style of a position. And the more strategically complex, the less likely they know it, almost till the ending. There are cases when it's so, but mostly when there's like a direct tussle, like the Najdorf, it could be theory till the ending. It could be till move 32, 34. And I would agree that MVL would know a lot of theory if it would be in his system of Grunfeld or Najdorf. You know, it is a binary option. You either take with the queen or the knight. The question is, which one would you prefer? Knight? Okay. So why would you prefer knight to the queen?
I want to keep my queen for an attack.
Okay.
It just seems like if I trade, I guess there's still plenty of it.
Okay. So you would want to keep the queen for an attack. Okay. Others say you should trade with the queen because we're ahead in development, and maybe in some sense our structure is better. And so this is sort of the moment where the jury would be out without a computer. But because we have computers, we have more of like a definitive answer of which one is better here. The queen captures or the knight captures. So we have a definitive answer, but also it doesn't mean humans couldn't come up with the same conclusion. I do want to add that. But with the computers also kind of pointing that direction, it's highly likely we should be taking with the knight, as Erdogmus did. Now, that doesn't make queen takes d4 completely illogical, because obviously white wants this 4 versus 3 pawn structure, and that's what sort of white is hoping to accomplish and try to play from there and maybe win the ending. The issue is that queen trade is very likely to happen, but what really matters most is who's going to benefit from that trade and how will that trade happen. So knight takes d4, bishop e7, and surprisingly enough, white goes bishop e3, and you could consider taking on e7, but this actually becomes sort of the idea of how and when you want to trade pieces. And one of the things is that, yes, white can take on e7, which technically gets rid of the pair of bishops, but it does help black get their pieces out very smoothly and quickly. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean captures is bad. It means that bishop e3 keeps the tension, and this bishop on e7 isn't particularly great at the moment. Also, that knight on g8 is a little bit off sides. Black goes knight h6, a very weird looking move, but there is a point behind it. You could go knight f6, but the whole point of knight h6 is it keeps jumps and pawn pushes open, and you're not blocking this f-pawn in general. Sometimes you are not even planning to go pawn f5, but pawn f6, and more of like building a sort of a fortress and stopping from white being able to push those pawns down the board. So, which leads us to try to figure out a way to respond to knight h6. Knight b5 does not really work. We've got to deal with too many pawns on a6 and c6. It would look cool, but it just doesn't work because we don't have any tactics there. So there is actually a big misunderstanding whenever people start teaching chess. They kind of look for captures, but in fact you should be looking for your opponent's threats first. That should be the very first thing you do. Threats are actually even more important than checks, because checks can be absolutely meaningless in a serious chess game. Of course, in blitz or rapid, sometimes obviously it takes priority because you don't have that much time left. But in a serious, long, and classical game, you want to sort of deal with your opponent's ideas first. And captures, checks, they come later. You're talking serious chess here, yeah.
Are we worried about g4 then?
Yeah, so there is obviously this knight g4 idea. yeah, you can respond strategically, positionally. Those are synonymous. So queen g6 doesn't really do much, because even if they go there, like if they could have an extra move, we can still block it. So I would reckon that bigger threats, knight g4, they might try to dislodge our knight with c5, but we can't really do too much about that yet. We could do h3. What else could we do? And that's no criticism to pawn to h3. We can also do f3. Now, knight f3, I'm not a big fan of. Why? Because we have a very, very good knight on d4. Voluntarily retreating the knight would something that we'd call a concession. But definitely h3 or f3 is on the cards. Surprisingly, there's a third move which Erdogmus does play. Yes. Knight a3. Okay, but then I will still go knight g4. So what we're trying to figure out is how to deal with this threat. We don't quite have enough to just go for counterplay. Yeah, g3 would be a mistake because it doesn't really stop. Yeah. Knight f5, I mean, I do have too many pieces covering that square. If we could, we might consider it, but we're just outnumbered. So there is h3, f3, and sometimes, and this is one of the more grandmasterly moves. So what Erdogmus plays is something that's been a recurring theme in the Scotch. So this move is by far grandmasterly because you'd be thinking, how do I stop knight g4? And they'd be thinking, well, how can I counterattack if they go knight g4? So they kind of look deeper of the idea of knight g4. So let's say we allow knight g4. What are they threatening? They are threatening mate in 1, which is something we want to avoid, and they're also threatening to take the bishop. How can we stop that threat of queen takes h2 checkmate while also improving our pieces? Yes. Very good. Queen d2, which looks incredibly strange, and I don't blame you if you feel that way. The queen on d2 is super well protected, and if black goes knight g4, then we have bishop f4, and it improves our piece, makes this knight look a little bit clumsy. Once the queen moves, we might even just kick it out, but we don't even have to do it immediately. So you might actually notice how strong this move is, and that's why it is very good for you to learn different openings. Like I've seen this idea from the Scotch. If you've seen Scotch games, in fact, a Gary Kasparov special, then you would actually consider it. If you've never seen it before, oftentimes it's very difficult to find ideas like this at the chessboard. So queen d2, pawn c5, knight e2. Now, you might be wondering, well, why knight e2? Why not knight to f3? The point of knight e2 is that if you put the knight on f3, the e5 square is pretty, but it does nothing for us. But there is a different square that we care about. Yes? Well, f4, but is that the final destination for our knight? I mean, you can go g3, f4, but never forget it is always about the 4 key squares. Always been and always will be. So if you go f4, which is not any of these center squares, where would your knight be heading to? d5, exactly. So knight f4, knight d5, that's where you're supposed to be going to, and especially good because your e4 pawn is supporting that square. Now, you might argue that black gets to play pawn to c6, but then the more you push those pawns, the weaker they get. So in reality, it actually becomes kind of challenging for black to defend. But let's see what happened in the game. So queen takes d2, knight takes d2, and you may notice that the ideas are very similar. Previously, black tried to make us trade on e7 and improve our pieces. But here, instead of improving MVL's pieces, Erdogmus forced black to capture on d2, and we gained the move by capturing back with the knight. So knight takes d2, and now we get that typical battle in this ending where white has a 4 versus 3 on the king side, but black has the bishop pair. So bishop e6. Bishop e6 is an interesting move. He is directly trying to control the d5 square. You could also consider going bishop d7, but it does have the downside of allowing my knight to land on d5. So bishop e6, h3, long castles. And we are actually after the opening phase. Technically, we're already in an ending, but it's like a mix of, it is still an ending, but still with a lot of pieces on the board. It's only the queens that have been traded and a couple of pieces. Now, what makes these positions difficult is that you have to come up with a strategy. It's not enough just to shuffle around. That's also an option. But eventually, you have to hit on a plan. Now, there's a couple of things you can do. You can play on the basic strategy, which would be somewhat of a caveman method if you think about it. 4 versus 3, let me try to exploit that. But there's some other ways of trying to solve the position or figure it out. Yes? So if you trade, trades are actually... Oh, okay. So, well, trading kind of connects with the idea of you trying to exploit that you have that extra pawn on the king side. But what I'm saying is that that's one way of thinking, but there's a second one and a different way of thinking that you could use here. And that's what I'm asking for y'all to try to find out. Now, coming back to the trades, not every trade is created equal, as you'll figure out if you play long enough. And if you, for example, trade here, the problem with that is that you had a bishop. Now you have no bishops at all. So black has a pair of bishops. Your only advantage that is left for you is the 4 versus 3. You might claim, though, that these pawns are weak, but also you sort of lost a vice. And even if you trade a bishop, you don't have a bishop left to compensate. So if it would be the same colored bishops, your advantage would be greater. Also, do we prefer the bishop to this knight or not? a simple enough question, but hey, it has to be asked. Do we prefer that bishop to the knight? Definitely we do. And in fact, that's the other way of looking at this position, noticing the differences between the pieces. So if we look at our knights, they're decent, and so are these bishops. I'm going to make them a different color because they're quite strong, they're useful. But what are the worst pieces that black has? These bishops are actually fine, surprisingly. Because, yes, it has to... Oh, no, I was asking for black, sorry.
What about the rook on
h8,
h8?
so as long as a piece can get improved in a single move, it's okay. So black can improve this rook in a single move, so it's not a big deal. As long as your piece will need a lot of time to be improved, it's going to be a terrible piece. Yes?
The pawn on a6?
Well, but pawns don't really matter that much. Like, you know, you want to look for something higher value than a pawn.
Then the knight on h6.
Of course.
Or the king.
It takes at least 2 moves to improve it.
It definitely takes 2 moves to improve, and it's also white to make a decision because it's white's turn, because black just castled. Usually the kings, they're only a big issue if it's under attack or it's completely misplaced, but the kings are usually not the culprit. It's most of the time pieces that are super misplaced, like the knight on h6, knight on the rim is dim, as we all know that. But it's one thing to point out that, hey man, your knight is awful, and the other one is to take advantage of it, making sure it doesn't really take part in the game. So Erdogmus's next move is a very classy one, and I hope you'd find what he did here. And it really is just going against that knight on h6. Well, queen takes d2. The queen trade was more or less forced. And black doesn't really get a huge advantage if they let the trade happen. In some sense, you could argue that the knight would rather be on c3 than on d2. So that's why MVL chose, so the black side chose to trade on d2 in the first place and not allowing white to do it differently. Now, chess actually is about knowing some of the principles of the game. One of the principles of having bishops is to, what should you do if you have a pair of bishops? Yes? Well, so what I'm asking is, when are the bishops useful, most useful? When a game is wide open, so you're supposed to open it up. So, in many cases, you can look at a position like this one and say, okay, so how could black possibly open up the position?
Well, we could try f5.
Yeah, go ahead.
G4.
Sure, but what is black going to do?
F5.
Exactly. Both of you are correct. F5 is something that's on the menu. Therefore, well, not captures, but so he's going to go for g4. He goes knight f4 first. He's sort of threatening the capture on e6. As you'll see, he's going to go for this idea of g4. Same idea, though. He is stopping that f5 move from happening. So that's actually what top players do. They improve their pieces while stopping the opponent from getting any sort of counterplay. Bishop f6, c3. This pawn chain is very, very useful. The bishop cannot blast through this. Therefore, this bishop becomes useless. Rook e8. Knight takes. Of course, you can't touch this because the knight is hanging. Takes. Rook e1. Bishop e7, g4. Black was about to be ready to push the pawn, so he goes g4. And white's advantage is pretty significant because black lost the bishop pair, and all is left for now is a bad knight, a somewhat weakened pawn on c5, and that 4 versus 3. Knight takes e6 premature? No. Knight takes e6 is a good move because it gets rid of black's main source of counterplay, and that's the bishops. So g4, g5, and g5, well, g5 is easy to criticize afterwards, but the thing with g5 is that it does help white to initiate play. So it might be a little bit more circumspect to sit and wait and maybe go even knight g8 and try to build a fortress. But g5 is a bit more ambitious and optimistic. I'd put it more optimistic. Now, how should we try and follow through with our play? Yes, Erdogmus. Yes. Knight f3. Okay, well, you do leave that pawn there. I might even just go pawn f6 now. Yes.
A couple ideas, but you could try to go f4 or even h4.
Okay. So, what is your hunch? f4 or h4?
Well, h4 loses a pawn, so
Mhm.
you could go f3, h4, or you could just go f4 immediately.
So,
I would probably go f4 because you can take the rook to a double up.
f4, very good. So f3, h4, and this is one of the things with this. Try to play for something that is principled and is not playing on a trick. The idea of pawn h4 is sort of saying, oh, I have some neat ideas on your knight. But if the knight can hop away in a single move, that idea in your plan that you're having might not last. So it's better to play on a concept than on one other idea that won't last long enough. So f4, and f4 is a very, very good move here. You're just playing on the principle that you have more pawns, you've got better pieces. You should be trying to find a new target, and that is the f7 pawn. So takes, bishop takes, pressing the knight, knight g8, a classy move by MVL, but it is not quite a pleasant move to make in general, but he does what he has to do. So, if you keep in mind what I said a minute ago, what would you think would be the most principled way of playing? And of course, it's in no doubt that white does have a bit of an advantage. Yes? You could go knight c4. I could go pawn f6 then, let's say. Yes?
What about e5 right away?
You could, so you could, all of these moves are reasonable, but you sort of have to ask yourself a question. Which side of the board you're most likely to play on?
The
The king side. So you sort of want to gravitate in that direction. But again, don't forget, even in positions where you have a favorable position, it doesn't mean tricks don't exist. So let's say, if I say that, would you prefer to push the pawn or would you prefer to bring your knight over? Why? Why would you bring the knight over, knowing that?
Well, the knight over has the square knight e5, and I can also push g5 later.
Okay, but the question I have for you, I get it, I understand that's why you would want to go knight to f3, but why would you backtrack from pawn to g5?
Well, I was thinking if we go like h6 or
They could try to
6,
undermine you.
go like g5,
Uh-huh.
knight takes it,
Mm-hmm.
and then once you get bishop with bishop,
Yes, so g5, h6, but remember, in chess, sometimes we fall into main character syndrome. We assume that all the moves we're making is awesome, and sometimes they're not. So if we go g5, surprise, surprise, even though I don't see anything too bad with pawn to h6, there's some other bigger problems.
problem for white or black.
Black. I mean for white, because black has a move.
Rook pin, g.
Rook could pin.
Oh, can the bishop just take and then rook pin?
Exactly. So bishop takes, and there's rook g6.
And then you can go knight.
And then either way, they can go h6 or f6. Exactly. So that's exactly the reason why you want to look for multiple moves, even for your opponent. If you're just staring at h6, g5 might not actually seem that bad. But then you hit up on rook g6, you look a little longer, and then you hit on bishop g5. And there's multiple issues. Not only you have issues with the bishop, the knight's also a target. Most likely still, you are going to try to capture the bishop instead. So for that reason, Erdogmus just plays it clean, goes knight f3, f6. And again, you could see like this is just getting more and more better for white because the knight on g8 is really an unhappy beast because it's locked in by the pawn and bishop simultaneously. You can't quite go knight f6 as mentioned in chat because knight g5, and I actually double attack, which is the key of the game. Also, I might just start rolling you with the e-pawn, which is more or less just winning. So f6 was played. Now, we're in an ending. With every trade, we're getting closer to a classic ending because there's still a pair of rooks on the board. There's still a bit of middle game going over here. But in endings, there's one thing, and one thing only, that you should strive to get. No. It's never a check. It's the last thing you do in an ending. Sorry to disappoint, but those are the facts. What do you do before checkmating in an ending?
Well,
Promote pawns. But before you could promote pawns, you gotta trade that pawn, and naturally you trade the e-pawn because the farther the pawns are, the more likely they're going to become passed pawns. This king is very close to the center, so a center passed pawn could be blocked either by those pieces that are lined up on the e-file or by the king, which takes a very little time for that king to get there. So c4, which is a fine move, MVL is trying to activate that bishop. So if we would be a little hasty, then the bishop would show up and pin us. So king g2. And I like these little moves, and that's another classy move by Erdogmus. He's getting out of all these tricks, and the upside of this is that I improved my position. The king will be useful in the ending. Also, I'm renewing the idea of knight to d4, which can no longer be pinned. F takes, rook takes naturally. We're aiming for more trades here. Rook takes, knight takes e5. And this is a beautiful, beautiful position. This is a target. My knight is happy in the middle of the board. And notice that my bishop actually is doing double duty, because not only does it help our pawns on the king side, it also stops from black getting any sort of counterplay. So even though you do see bishops in the center, but they are actually very useful even if they're just on the periphery of the center, because they actually help out on both sides of the board. So b5. All right, so how can we keep continuing with our good old plan? Yes?
Well, if you want to trade off a lot of pieces, you could go knight c6.
Okay, so you could trade pieces with knight c6, but do tell me, is this knight better than this bishop?
It looks like it now.
It is better. So if your piece is much better, I reckon you'd only want to trade it if you win something. You shouldn't just trade on a whim. You only want to trade when you win a pawn or it just drastically improves your position. Because with every trade, you will actually improve the task of the defensive side. So
Could you still go knight c6 and then like knight d4 or something?
okay, but if you go knight c6, double attacking those, and go knight d4, it's an idea, but I don't quite see a reason you need to move your knight around. I think your knight is quite good on e5 already. I mean, just look at the way Erdogmus is playing so far. Quite streamlined. You just want to follow in the same direction and you'll succeed, as Erdogmus does. So just trade it on e5, and logically, this next move is sort of the build-up of what white wanted to do all along. Yeah. Rook e1? Well, you could put the rook there. But what is your grand plan? Yes.
You could do rook f2 to just like not let the rook come in. And that's
Well, the rook can't come in because your bishop is there to cover it.
right.
So you don't need, like, rook f2 is not necessary. Always focus on your goals. What is our goal again? Promote that pawn.
So g5.
G5, of course. Now, G5 is a very nice move, and it has a dual purpose. Not only does it make our opponent nervous, it also keeps that knight stuck in there. On G8, it's sitting there, can't move at all, and we're also rolling them pawns up the board. Menacingly, I may add. So H4, H5, very simple play. Knight D5 and goes bishop C1. And this is actually like typical top GM play. You don't give your opponent the option of choosing of the trades they'd like. They move the bishop away, so you only trade on your terms. So knight e3, bishop takes e3, bishop takes e3. In this case, we didn't have a choice, but we don't really mind. Takes, knight f7, rook g8, king h3. Setting up some tricks, because if you do go here, have rook g1, and you can't just jump away with the rook, which sometimes you could do, because I take there. King d7. So the question is of how can we control and make sure the g pawn is going to be covered? Yes.
Well, you could just go g6 right away.
I take.
Pawn takes.
Okay. I move my king up.
Yeah. And then you can pin the bishop.
Ah, you pin me. But I can take. So you go here. I take.
Get the other pawn.
But I take your knight.
You don't even have to move your rook though. You can just advance your king, right?
Well, if you advance your king, I take the pawn with a check. So you're just kind of creating problems for yourself. And I understand. I see the good intentions. But when you go g6, the problem is you don't have enough support. Yes.
So I would say that white rooks is kind of useless right now.
Uh-huh.
Maybe moving it, putting pressure on the bishop.
Oh.
One. And then moving it again later.
You could, but you're still not dealing with this side of the board. You guys are getting a little distracted with the bishop. It's not a bad idea necessarily, but you want your pieces to sort of work together.
So
Yes.
rook f6.
You could go rook f6, but then I take the pawn. Well, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Like king h1, king g4.
Yeah, you could go king h4. Now, a good idea is to put your king on a color that's opposite of your opponent's bishop.
Because it can't check.
Yeah. Now, talking about tricks, there's always a trick. And if you take, I pin you, and I win the knight. So even when you have a fantastic position, it's very easy to fall for a cheapo. Never underestimate your opponent's counter chances. And sometimes you get trigger happy and you go for it anyways. So king g4 is a very, very smart move by Erdogmus, just keeping the position. King e7, now g6, but there's a difference. h6, and now no longer do you have the same idea because I'm no longer pinned. Also, I might just simply bring my king up. And now this is a completely different ballgame because h7, if I win the rook, it's game over. Up a piece, it's still some fighting chances, but here, if I win your rook, it's just over. So MVL does take the bishop. The bishop does take the pawn. Knight takes, rook d8. So this is the last moment. We are up a piece, but we do have to make sure we still have material left to win the game. Because if we actually lose all of our pawns, it is a draw. Objectively, it's been lost by very strong players before, but, we don't have to get there. Rook f2. He checks first, but rook f2 is just as fine to over-defend. He throws in a check, goes back to rook f2, and that's very good. And especially when you're up ahead and you have extra material, never forget to make sure and use the buddy system, making sure everyone's holding hands and they're defending each other. Because even if you shed a pawn, you'll trade something. Once you're up a piece, what matters is that you trade. So rook d1. And the last thing that we need to find here is the coordination for white. And then practically the game wins itself. So that's the last thing I will ask you guys to try find. How would you consolidate here? Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I would just go like rook g2.
Okay, so if you would get another move after rook g2, what would you do after?
Well, if I had two moves like that,
Knight g8?
yeah, rook f6 or king g5, rook f6.
So how does rook g2 help you with knight g8?
Well, I was thinking that rook g2 to like king g5.
Okay. Okay. Now, the question I'm asking you, do you have to go rook g2 to kind of find a safe way out for your knight? Okay. So if you don't have to do rook g2, how else could you get that knight out?
Well, we could go like king f4 or king g5.
Okay, king f4 and then how?
What?
King f4 and then how would you continue after?
Well, knight g4.
Knight g4, of course. You had a different idea?
I was going to say king g5,
Uh-huh.
then knight g4 or knight f7.
Okay. Now, you do have to be careful. You don't want to overload your rook with defending too many things at the same time. I don't think it's necessarily a huge issue here. But, for example, if we do this, they can check us and actually cut our king. Now, the biggest danger you ever face in a rook ending or any type of ending is your king is cut. Because when you're practically down a king, oftentimes there'll be drawing chances or the side that has a king cut might even lose. You're up a piece here, that's not going to be a big deal. It's not going to happen, but black might get some chances here. So it goes king f4. The same idea exactly, just getting that knight out. And that's actually the reason why people look for more than one single move, because they're wondering, okay, if I do rook g2, what is my plan? Can I do it without rook g2? And then you actually come up with another idea. And that's how you find king f4, or many does. Now king f4, the game is going to soon be over. Knight g4 as the knight is heading back. a3, b4, it's desperado. A little bit of trade is fine here, because we're still going to keep one more pawn. King e4, and black actually just resigned here. Because even if they takes, the issue is I might be able to cut you, but I can go knight e3, win that pawn. If you go here, I just defend this guy. I pick up this pawn. You do something random, and I just start pushing that pawn. Now, if a pawn would be far away from our pieces, black would have a shot of trying to win it somehow, which could get drawish. But because after this pawn push, this pawn is multiple times overguarded and defended, black is just completely losing, because every trade is going to lead to a winning ending. And therefore, MVL resigned a little bit earlier than that, just after white played king e4, which does threaten both king d4 and knight e3, trying to pick up the c4 pawn. So that is the game I wanted to show you all tonight. Really hope you had a good impression on this young, talented, soon-to-be super grandmaster. Any questions about this game or Erdogmus before I wrap up? All right, thank you so much for coming.